Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, living beneficiaries, to the show for living beneficiaries, the House of Hidalgo show on the Estate Radio Network. Prepare for the most educational 60 minutes on all of radio with your host, Rick Hidalgo. The House of Hidalgo show can be followed on Twitter or Facebook by searching House of Hidalgo. Find the show on the web at www.therockofsalem.org. Sign up for the newsletter, and while you're there, take the 5-question survey to let us know what you think. The Estate Radio Network is part of the Blog Talk Radio family of networks and can be found at www.blogtalkradio.com/South Dakota DP. Join the show now by chat or call 619-639-4605. Don't forget to dial 1 to get in the queue. Here's your host, Rick Hidalgo! Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rick Hidalgo. I am, of course, the host of the House of Hidalgo show here on the State Radio Network. And we are so blessed this morning to be on a little earlier than we ever have been, but there's a very good reason for that, and that's because I'm talking to a good brother from across the ocean. And boy, this is going to be an exciting show. Before I get to that, real quick here, I just want to instruct you that if you're online or near a computer, you can certainly participate in our chat room at blogtalkradio.com/South Dakota DP. And that's at the bottom of the page. You can certainly ask your questions there, and I will ask those questions for you. Or you could call in at 619-639-4605. That's 619-639-4605, and we'll certainly take your questions there as well. Today's, as I mentioned, a very special day because I've got a brother from across the sea with us today. His name is Mark Darwin, and he is out of, I believe Australia. And truthology.org.au is the website that generated the attention for me, as their motto is a beacon of truth in a sea of lies. And boy, Mark, that really struck me big time, because I've just awoken to the presumption that I was lost at sea, and here I am doing a show on the Sea of Lies. So I welcome you to the program.
Well, it's nice to be here, Rick, and thank you for having me on the show. I know we've tried a few times, but I've been traveling around Europe on a bit of a sabbatical, and we've been struggling with the internet and thunderstorms, so it's great to finally be here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your willingness to come on, because the subjects that we talk about here are just so immense and important to the people who occupy this planet that whatever time it took to get you on was well worth it. So thanks again for coming on. I wonder, Mark, if you would start by just talking a little bit about Truthology.org.au and kind of how you got that thing going, and how what your intentions are here.
Sure, Rick. Well, ology is obviously the study of, so we're right into studying the truth, and it's a rabbit hole, as most of your listeners would appreciate. So, my background was, unfortunately, I was a bankster, and I helped set up one of the big non-lenders or non-bank lenders in Australia. So we sort of brought the subprime market into Australia. And even at the time when we were setting up these bonds and filling these bonds up with mortgages, I asked myself, how are we doing this? Chronologically, how are we going out and lending money that we don't have and then going and selling it on the bond market? And I was told by the CEO, well, welcome to the magic of banking. And, from that time, I always questioned the creation of money. And look, so for me, I went, probably like most people, I went to a one-day course many people come across this information in different ways, but I went to a one-day course. A lot of people, come across it online. But this course was about sovereignty, and it was about living as a true sovereign. And at the time, I was wanting to set up a community for my family and so forth. And so I thought I went there not expecting a whole lot. And at the end of the day, it really derailed me. I, at the time, was still in the land of banking and promoting capitalism through property and shares and so forth. So everything that I heard in this course, I think you'll appreciate, Rick, when you hear something that's true as truth, it resonates right through every sense of your being. And so I then left that course, learning about the public and the private and the creation of birth certificates and money and so forth, and started to research it for myself online. And my business partners wanted to know where I was because I disappeared for 2 weeks. And so they called a board meeting and I resigned. And it was a very tough thing to do because I felt like I was really letting them down, and it was a paradigm shift in thinking for myself. But, I think once you open Pandora's box, there's no slamming that lid down. As much as sometimes that ignorant bliss can be comforting, it's no path forward. So from there, I really started to study this stuff and went to a lot of other courses. And of course, everything that you uncover is true through evidence. And I then started Truthology with my beautiful partner, Stephanie, who interestingly enough came to me in a whole world of debt for help. And so, we're now sort of crusading through with an amazing team behind us. But what we've learned along the way, and it's been through trial and error, Rick, I'm sure that, there's a lot of listeners now that come across this information and they unfortunately may go looking for magic bullets, and they possibly at times use other people's information and other people's templates. Mm-hmm. And when tested, which is why it's called testimony in court, when tested, they may not have the true knowledge behind it. So for me, it's been a path of discovery, of self-discovery through a lot of other things that I've since started, like meditation and so forth. But discovering what they've created. And I think we'll all agree that what has been created through trust law and legalese is extremely clever. It's extremely clever. And, one of the things that the most interesting things that I've discovered is the creation of trust law through all the papal bulls and so forth through the Vatican.
Yes. And
that's just been absolutely fascinating. And I think, Rick, I think one of the things that I got through my trip through Europe was it was a good opportunity because I come from Australia, which is a very young country. It's only 200 and something odd years old. But, some of the places that I went in Europe had buildings dating right back, obviously, to the Colosseum and so forth. But, it's amazing to see how powerful the church has been in dominating thought. And, you go to some of these little villages in France and Italy and so forth, and what overtowers everything is the church. And, of course, Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar and time, a different time, which took us out of sync with the lunar cycles and so forth. And then, of course, the bell rings every hour to remind you that God's watching.
Right, and then when you walk into the church, there's a crucifix to remind you what happens when you're disobedient.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's not the all-loving God that I want to have anything to do with. That's going to send me to hell and damnation for having bad thoughts from time to time. But anyway, look, I'm not here to run Christianity down nor any religion, because we have a lot of Christians who are clients. But
yes.
I don't believe Christ wanted people to be Christians any more than Buddha wanted people to be Buddhists. I believe they demonstrated a wholesome way of being through the divine, and that's fine. But I think it's mankind that has twisted everything from there for power. And so looking at these little villages and seeing these huge churches towering above the people, especially there's one little place in York, and it's called, well, it's not little, it's the York Minster Abbey, which is the second biggest abbey behind the Westminster Abbey. And, when you look at when it was built, and I think it was the 1200s, then there's another street there called the Shambles that's as it was back then. And, these buildings towered over tiny little thatched roofed shanties of people living in poverty. And the church was, of course, the authority back then. It was the court. It made the laws. So when you look back then at the history of that, and understanding that I don't know if most people understand that a papal bull is a very powerful document, and it's where all this trust law started. Have you discussed those sorts of things on your show, Rick?
We have some, but Mark, you can certainly expound on it. We've talked about some more recent discoveries that we've made, as we've discovered that some of those papal bulls that you speak of are actually what initiated, through the Roman Curia, all this commerce law that we're under today.
Yeah, that's right. And so the first significant papal bull was, of course, Unum Sanctum, which is UNAM, second word SANCTAM, Unum Sanctum, which was written in 1302 by Pope Boniface VIII, I think it was, from memory. And it came at a time when the world was torn by brute force. They ruled with might and with the sword. And I think the Vatican realized that humanity was becoming more conscious, and that they needed to start to rule by the pen. Hence the expression, the pen is mightier than the sword. So, of course, they introduced these papal bulls, which is seen to be the word of God written through the head of the church, which is the Pope. And they declared that there's no higher power than that of the Roman pontiff. And to deny this is to resist God's ordinance. And, it's important for people to understand that back in 1302, the world was steeped in rituals and superstition and so forth. And so these were very powerful things that they declared. And they essentially, the Vatican realized that nobody owns anything, Rick. I'm sure you and your listeners agree. Nobody owns anything. We're passing through very quickly. We're custodians of this planet that will survive long after we do. And so they realized this, that nobody owns anything. And so they declared in this papal bull that the Vatican actually owns everything and everyone on planet Earth. And this was followed up in the 1400s, 1500s, and 1600s with three more important papal bulls, which were known as the Triple Crown of Baal. There was Convocation and Attorney Regis and so forth, where they then started claiming specifically ownership over land and other chattels such as animals and humans. And then, of course, all property, labour, and the big one, our souls. They declared ownership over our souls through baptism. And, you can read these. They're incredibly powerful documents if people believe them, of course.
Right.
And so through legalese from there, they've created a world that we don't really understand. It sounds like our normal language, but there's interpretations of the word. For instance, most people think that property is what, Rick? That property is the car or the land or the house.
Right.
Trust or property is not the thing or the item. It's merely the right of use. And so people don't really understand some of the terminology in documents that they're signing. So, people that think their own property are merely tenants. Now, I don't know how it works in the US, but in Australia, there's two ways you can buy a property. One is joint tenants, or the other is tenants in common. But either way, they're telling you that you're a tenant. So
yes, it's the same way here, Mark.
Okay. And that's one thing that I was going to bring up, is that it doesn't actually matter what part of the world you're in. All laws or all legal matters all stem from the Roman system. And so that's why it doesn't matter which country you go to, whether it be Japan, the US, Indonesia, Australia, all the courts look very similar. They have similar rituals and procedures, and they're all based on these ancient Roman laws. They just have different acts and statutes and names. But it's quite amazing that people think that they own the property, but if you look at the title deed, and a title is merely an inscription, the first lien to the title is the crown. And now the crown is not the monarchy, obviously. It's the city of London, one of the sovereign states, including the Vatican. So there's the Vatican, Washington D.C., and the city of London. And so it's really about understanding what the true meaning of these words are. And of course, they hide a lot of it with Latin. A lot of laws and orders that are given by the court have some sort of Latin in there, which is still part of the rituals and procedures. But interestingly, through one of those papal bulls that in the Triple Crown of Baal around the 14 to 1600s was the creation of the word Commonwealth. Now, I know even in the US, the word Commonwealth is used in the courts and some of the courts. And, of course, the commoner back then was just fodder, and still is, seen by the Illuminati as fodder. And so the wealth means sweat equity. So Commonwealth is the sweat equity of the slave. And, these are words that we use all too often without really understanding what the true meaning is. So I think it's been fascinating for me to then see the transition of that in today's world, where, of course, your listeners will know then that all courts work on assumption and presumption. And through these trust laws, they and through asking certain questions, they have us turn up in ignorance and admit to being the trustee. And, of course, the trustee pays.
Yes, that's exactly right. And yeah, it's just those presumptions that we're starting to become aware of. The vast number of presumptions that we're under. Little by little, we are starting to understand and expose them. But Mark, you're doing a great work in exposing that, and please continue.
Well, there's a great teacher of the history of trust law and what we can do about it here in Australia as well. He's known as Franco Collins. I don't know if you've heard of Franco Collins, but one of the things that I love about Frank is I'll step back. A lot of people come to our site, Rick, and then they contact me and say, "Oh, I've got a speeding fine, or I've got a parking fine, or how do I get out of it?" Mm-hmm. And they need to realise a few things. The first thing is that they have voluntarily consented through the application, and apply means to beg, of course, through an application for a driver's licence or whatever it may be. They voluntarily consented to be part of that system, and so they must remove themselves from that system, or know when they're acting in the public or the private, and be competent enough. And competency is a huge word, because I think a lot of people go looking for magic bullets, Rick. They go looking for a template that somebody else has written that has their energy and their knowledge behind it, and they send it off. And of course, if that's ever tested, which is why it's called testimony in court, if that's ever tested and they're seen to not have true knowledge or true volition behind the document that they've sent, that can almost be seen as fraud. So it's really important that people have the tenacity and the courage and the willingness and commitment to study and discover who they truly are. Because if you're not competent, then I would suggest it's not a great idea to send some of the letters off that they do. There are people here in Australia who do it and turn up to court full of hot air, and they'll be put in contempt. We know somebody here in Australia who's just been given 28 days for contempt of court for speaking over the judge and so on and so forth. So it's never going to work. If you are dragged before them by the Gestapo, then you have to be polite and courteous and know who you are. And so that's one thing that I will say, is that it's really important that people do the study, because there are no quick answers. And it's really important that otherwise, you will pay. They will make you pay, because if you are seen to be incompetent, then you're seen to be a ward of the state, and you need a little rest.
Yes, and I totally agree with you. I love what you're saying. You're saying it so clearly and emphatically. You have to come in peace, and you better darn well have read at least and understood that what you're sending in, because the moment that they see you flip flop, you're a goner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's Steph and I had a few incidences with the police when we first came across this information, 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm the first to confess that in my first incident with the police, I was a little brash and smart alecky, and luckily enough, I let the 2 police officers hang themselves with a few silly things that they said before I noticed them that they were being recorded on 3 different devices, and 2 of them were live streaming, and that certainly shortened them up. But they really did overstep their purported authority even. And so I was issued a notice to appear to court, and went to court 2 weeks later, and the matter had, funnily enough, vanished, which I found interesting, because they issue documents in triplicate here. So I don't know what they did there, but But certainly from that time on, I've been very polite and courteous because I think the police do an incredible job. I've had incidences where my mother had a partner who was very violent towards her, and I'm certainly grateful that the police helped her out on many occasions. So I'm not here to run the police down at all, but I am here to say that at times I think they overrun their purported authority even. So I think it's important for people to understand too that a lot of the time, as I said before, they do mutually consent. And there's a fantastic chap by the name of Noam Chomsky. Have you heard of Noam Chomsky, Rick?
I have not. Please enlighten me.
Noam is sort of an intellectual, into sociology and psychology and philosophy, and he's written some amazing books. But one of his most important works in my mind is a book called Manufacturing Consent, and it's all about how the Illuminati and the hand behind the curtain have done exactly that. They've manufactured consent. So people think that they have to apply for a driver's license. They think that they have to apply for, I don't know what you call it over there. We call it a tax file number. And if you set up a company, that you have to apply for a company number and so forth. And so, of course, when you do that, you're voluntarily consenting to the rules and regulations and by rules of the corporations that you're applying to them with. And it's an absolutely fantastic book because, of course, when humanity said that slavery is no longer acceptable, they needed to be careful and clever with what they applied to mankind, and they've done this very, very cleverly. I mean, how many people listening are nodding their head right now, wondering why they applied for a driver's license or why they applied for certain things, or why they applied for a building license?
Mm-hmm.
Extremely clever what they've done. Having said that, you need to know what you're doing, and if you have done that, then it's honourable at times to follow through, and that's not what a lot of listeners might want to hear. But it's very important that we're very conscious now of what we sign and contracts that we enter into. So we've written a document that I've used a couple of times, and our clients use quite regularly, called an affidavit of truth. Have you heard of a similar document, Rick?
I have. We use these for notice purposes all the time here. Great.
I've actually just changed mine recently to what I call a declaration of a sentient being. I'm trying to really step out of even using
Beautiful.
Their commerce terms, and an affidavit, of course, is a very court-based legalese term, but I still like it. It's an unrebutted affidavit will stand in law, and so, of course, when these are issued, if they're not answered, then it's seen to be given as the truth. But I like a declaration. Of course, a declaration is a sacred oath, a declaration of a sentient being. And that merely states that at times you may act as the beneficiary to some of these trusts that have been established. So if I'm hit by a bus and need to be scraped off the road and taken to hospital, we have a great healthcare system in Australia. No, I'm happy to be the beneficiary in that circumstance. I know that there are accounts that have been established, of course, on our future sweat equity, but this document merely states that through consciousness and through true volition, we have the right to act in certain ways at certain times, and that you may deny wanting to be the beneficiary or the trustee in certain circumstances, but it's really up to the individual to know when the certain applications apply. Does that make sense?
It does, perfectly.
So I think also it's important for people to ask questions. It's one of my favourite sayings to my clients, is that it's all very clever what they've put together. It's extremely ingenious. In fact, there's not a week goes by, Rick, where I don't talk to our other team members and we sit just nodding our head going, wow, that's it's very clever what they've put together. But questions are the answers. It's one of my favourite statements, is that questions are the answers. And so understanding the trickery of what they've put together can be fun, but really it's about asking them the right questions and really defining what the jurisdiction is. Now, juris is law, diction is to speak. So what law are they speaking to you? And, I've used this many times with police officers and magistrate judges and even higher judges than that. and they don't like it because, of course, under the law of silence, they must answer. And the last thing they want me saying in court, which I've said a few times, is I've asked them a question in what's called a negative averment. Do you guys cover that sort of thing?
Yeah, please go ahead. I have not talked about negative averments. That's perfect. Go ahead.
So the law of silence, which I think is a crazy law, the law of silence, of course, says that if there's a question asked or a statement made and you don't respond, then you agree. And so whenever I've been in court, and I'm not allowed in court anymore, by the way, I would ask, is it not the case, kind sir, that X, Y, and Z? I always say, is it not the case? And if they don't answer, then I say, I take it by your silence then that it is. And they don't like that because it's entered into the records, of course. So it's really a matter of asking the right questions and establishing jurisdiction. My recommendation is to do that without going to court.
Yes.
The courts are like going to the casino. The deck is loaded, and you have to be very, very careful and clever if you're going to have wins in courts. Now, we have clients that have had lots of wins in courts, generally not on the record, though. Most of the time, the matters are adjourned, and the other side are pulled aside, we believe, and said, you might want to let this one slide. And then the clients have received notices of discontinuance and so forth. We've only had a couple of wins in court that have been recorded, and one was, funny enough, a lawyer. We've got a lot of lawyers and barristers who are members, Truthology members. Many of them have hung up their robe, by the way, since becoming members. But we had one. Do you want to hear a particular story?
Please do. Yeah, sounds great.
We had one lawyer who questioned a speeding fine in Queensland, which is one of the states here in Australia. And he'd been studying a little bit of stuff through us. And so when he turned up to court, he was very nervous, interestingly enough, even though he'd spent much time in court defending clients and so forth. When he was there on his own reconnaissance, he was a little bit shaky and quite nervous, obviously because he was trialling something for the first time. And I'm sure, I don't know if you have, Rick, or I'm sure many of your listeners has, but I can identify with that because I know that when I studied this stuff, it all made sense. But I know the first time I went to court and challenged it, I was like, 5 minutes beforehand, I was questioning my sanity. I was a little bit nervous, but so he was quite nervous, and he went in, and it was a magistrate court, and the magistrate opened by saying that he found it very strange that a lawyer himself wouldn't be represented, which is what they like you to do. They like you to be represented by a lawyer. Mm-hmm. Of course, as an individual like us, as soon as you're represented, you've demonstrated to the court that you're incompetent and you need somebody to act for you. But on that basis, he then painstakingly, and we recorded all this. I'm sure many of your listeners do the same. We've got spy pens and so forth that we take into court to record it all. He painstakingly spent 11 or 12 minutes letting Warren, our lawyer client, know what his rights were. He sort of went through issues like you have the right to question jurisdiction, you have the right to question the authority, you have the right to ask all of these questions because the burden of responsibility is on the party making the claim. And we were gobsmacked. So certainly he started by asking who the Queensland Police Force were. Were they a function of government or were they a registered corporation? He wanted to know why the police constable wasn't present. He thought he had the right to cross-examine his accuser. And he asked 3 or 4 questions before the magistrate said, these are all very valid questions. What do you say on the other side? And the police had no answers. So he adjourned it to a proper hearing down the track. Now, I left Australia at that time, but we had a lot of Truthology members go. The hearing went on for 5.5 hours. Now, I'm sure it's similar in America that, these courts are just what I call a sausage factory. The ignorant masses are led before the court and there are rulings made and judgments and money to be paid. Well, this went on for 5.5 hours of all sorts of interesting rhetoric, and it was finally established that the police officer had no lawful right. The individual officer had no lawful right to issue a fine. And on that point, the matter was dismissed. Now, this was all on record, which we found really interesting because, as I said, they're normally shuffled out the back door. I'm sure you find it funny, and your listeners, that in fact, police were ordered to pay $990 in fines. In compensation back to our client.
Wow.
But point I'm making is that questions are the answers. They definitely are a form of remedy, and I know everyone's out looking for the next remedy. But I firmly believe that if you know who you are, if you know that you're a flesh and blood sentient being, and you own the answer to the creator or the divine or the universe, then all other laws are man-made. And it's about questioning what authority they purport to have. And it's very interesting what happens.
Absolutely, Mark, absolutely. And what you're saying is so confirming to me. As I walk this road, that's exactly what I have found as well. Tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break, and on the other side, we'd like to get into living in the private, if it's okay with you, sir.
Absolutely.
All right, be right back. Do you need an experienced editor to look over your short story, script, or novel? Do you need help building a platform or self-publishing your book? Are you on the cusp of realizing your dream, but you need someone to help you with those few extra steps? Are you a business in need of an established copy editor or copywriter? Dan O'Brien has more than a decade of experience in writing and publishing, and his rates are flexible. All that matters to Dan is the integrity of your artistic vision, and Dan can help you create the highest quality work possible. Please email Dan today at amalgamconsulting@gmail.com or visit his website, www.amalgamconsulting.com. That's AMALGAM consulting.com. Write Dan today. Start your dreams tomorrow. Do you have hopes, dreams, and goals, but don't know how to reach them? Do you wonder how you could do differently to achieve greater success at home or at work? Do you feel like something is holding you back from enjoying your life to the fullest? Are you fed up with status quo and ready for real and lasting life change? Are you wanting to start a business or expand an existing one? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then you are ready for life coaching with Mr. Attitude. Mr. Attitude will stretch and grow you and take your life to a whole new level of success by equipping you with the tools to help you to accomplish more in less time, get and keep your priorities in line, gain greater happiness and joy, face your fears, plan for success, be more assertive and confident, overcome negative stress, deal with negative thinking, set goals you will achieve, and more. Mr. Attitude specializes in results producing. Life strategy coaching for the personal side of your life. Small business coaching for those who want to start a small business or build a stronger small business. Train the trainer coaching for those who aspire to become a motivational professional speaker. Call today and reserve your appointment with greater success. 605-450-1955. That's 605-450-1955. Or email Bob at MrAttitudespeaks.com. That's MrAttitudespeaks.com. Mr. Attitude is committed to your success. We are back on the House of Hidalgo show. This is your host, Rick Hidalgo, on the Estate Radio Network, and I am on with Mark Darwin from Truthology.org.au. And boy, this has been a stimulating, awesome conversation with a true divine spirit. And I look forward to this second half, especially in that this is something that I've been working on myself. Is Mark, can you shed some light on this living in the private thing, brother? We got real troubles here in the U.S. with this Internal Revenue Service that's gone mad, and even to do any kind of banking, as I've tried to set up different trusts and different kinds of accounts in order to just do typical banking, and they always want you to have a number. Whether it be an employer identification number, a tax identification number, or a social security number, it's always some kind of a number. Can you help us here?
So it's interesting to say that, because in fact our AB, we affectionately call him AB, his name's Adrian. He's on a bank right now, US, and they're one of his missions to find a bank that will facilitate foundations. So you have been established called not-for-profit. Profit is obviously a public word and taxable. A not-for-profit, and let me say it's not hyphen for hyphen profit, which is actually a compound noun and has its own meaning rather than being three individual words. So it's a not-for-profit NGO, non-government organisation. I'm sure everybody's heard of NGOs. They operate throughout the world and do fantastic work. So they're not-for-profit NGO foundations. And we've been establishing them now here in Australia for 5 years. And, you know, we're very fortunate that you've got your big 4 or 5 banks in the US, and we've got the same here in Australia. And one of the big banks here has been facilitating those products for us. In fact, they absolutely love us because, you know, many of our clients are, you know, shall we say, well-to-do, and they've set these foundations up to operate their businesses and to give back. And they don't require, in Australia, we have what's called an Australian business number, an ABN. I'm sure you have something similar in the States, a company number. And yes, generally most banks, if it's seen to be any sort of commerce or trading, they will want it to be a registered company. And register obviously comes from the old word regis, meaning the crown. So again, another interesting word to dissect. So we register with the crown or with a higher authority, and submit, meaning under. We submit to be under their jurisdiction. So we set up foundations that are non-government organisations. We issue what's called articles of association, and they are the basis. It's only about a 7 or 8 page document that has evolved over the last 5 years. In fact, it's just had a few amendments changed with the barrister that specialises in tax matters over here. And it's a very powerful document, Rick. It's actually a beautiful document. A lot of our clients, when they establish them, we obviously ask them to read the articles many times, to absorb it, to feel the essence of them. And a lot of them are by the time they finished it, because it really states that we are sentient beings. And the essence of the foundation is to sustain the participants and to give back. What could be more ethical and noble than that? And you know, we've established them for 5 years. We've done hundreds and hundreds. I would guess somewhere between 500 and 600 foundations now. Not one has ever even been tapped on the shoulder or given a please explain by the Australian Tax Office. We believe, through a lot of advice, that they are outside the jurisdiction of the ATO, and which is the Australian Tax Office. And in fact, this has been tested. We've had clients that have come to us that have had companies and trusts and businesses that they've had financial issues with. They've set foundations up and tucked whatever money they had left into the foundation. And then the ATO have come in, as I'm sure the IRS do, and cleared out and frozen their accounts. All of them except the foundation. So we believe that the foundation is its own entity. It's not a legal, but it's a very lawful entity, and I know most of you people will be aware of the difference between lawful and legal. So I think that the essence of it is to give back, and it's not to give everything back. So it's not about you living on, you know, $200 a week and then giving it all back to different charities. The essence is to sustain the participants. So with a company, you have directors. With a trust, you have trustees. With the foundation, you have participants, and you have principal participants. So the essence is to give back. And, you know, Rick, we were put on this earth to live an abundant, loving life. And that is our right. That is our right under whatever religious or spiritual belief you have, is to live a free and abundant life. And so that's the first function of the foundation, is to sustain you. If you can't sustain you, you can't give back. But then it's to give back. And it doesn't have to be to a registered charity. It can be to anything that's worthwhile. It doesn't even have to be humanitarian. We give to an organisation called Free to Shine, which is an organisation that goes into Cambodia, and it helps put young girls in school that would be at risk of being sold into the sex slave industry. And so that's very, very valuable work for us, and we're actually going to be spending some time there helping them physically as well. But we also give back to a lot of animal rights organisations. So it's as long as you're giving back to something worthwhile. Now, for instance, we've got a client who grew up in an orphanage and then was fostered out. but he was a member of a karate club, and the karate club became his surrogate parent. He now gives back to that karate club. So as long as it's to a worthwhile organisation. So the foundations are extremely powerful. We're estimating that here in Australia alone, the foundations that we've set up are collectively giving back $3 to $4 million a year now. That's not going to these corporations masquerading as government or to the IMF, sending our brothers and sisters to war to kill each other. There's no way that I will ever consciously give money to a corporation masquerading as a government that does that. No way.
Right.
So these foundations are powerful. They work, but it's about finding a bank that will facilitate it. And so our partner is, as I said, on a plane right now over to the US. He's going to be there for 3 weeks. And one of his missions is to find a bank that will do that. I am quite confident there is one, Rick. It's here we had to meet with people a little higher up, of course, than at branch level to explain and go through the documentation. They had their legal team go through the documentation, and they gave it the green light. In fact, they almost created a product for us. So that's going to be our big issue in the US, is to just find a bank that will facilitate these products.
That sounds absolutely beautiful, and I hope that you would keep us informed here, because that is very important. In fact, we've even gone to the extreme of considering putting together a common law charter and operating out of that common law charter through articles similar to the instrument or the organization that you've put together, and forming what we call here a corporation soul. We've gone through a lot of extremes, but even there, the issue remains that when you actually go to the bank to institute such a document, you're cut off at the pass because you don't have one of these numbers that they're necessitating for their own benefit.
Yeah. Look, there are charities in Australia that are registered charities, and of course they're back in the public, and they have charity numbers or business numbers, and they still have to do returns and answer to the purported authorities. But there are NGOs, and there are NGOs throughout the world. So, look, I'm quietly confident that we'll be able to do it. I'm here in the UK. As you're probably aware, Rick, I've been here for the last 12 months setting a team up in the UK for Truthology. And it took us a long time to find a bank. We finally found a little rural sort of a farming bank here that would open the accounts up. We opened quite a few up, and then they changed their policy. So we're back at square one. So I don't know if the powers that be got hold of it and put a stop to it, but we're back to square one here in the UK. But I'm confident again we'll find another bank that does it.
Right. Yeah. And I can understand how those kind of things happen. They get pressure applied to them as well. So let's talk a little more about the difference in operating in commerce and living in the private. Can you expound on that a little bit? How do you remove yourself from commerce and participate in what's essential, yet stay out of the flow of their statutory authority, or so-called?
Look, that's a big question, and not everybody can, Rick, because here in Australia we have a lot of people who have set the foundations up, and what they have authority over are organisations that register under them. And so when you have a foundation, there is no authority. There's no purported authority. However, let's just say I have a foundation and I want to invoice a corporate entity, and they want to claim my invoice as a legitimate expense, of course, a deduction. Ordinarily here you have what they call GST, which is a goods and services tax. In the UK, it's VAT, a value-added tax. I'm sure you have similar taxes in the US.
Yes.
Normally they apply. So there is a document. There is always a remedy. So in the ATO site, which is www.ato.gov.au, there is a document called a 3346 form, and it's quite an amazing form. It's a one-page document that foundations issue to corporate entities when they're issuing an invoice. And it basically notices that entity that they are an NGO and therefore not obliged to charge GST. At the bottom of the form on the left-hand side, in a little box, now if you understand maritime law, anything in a box can't be seen or heard, but it says to the other party, do not send this form to the Australian Tax Office. So it's basically the remedy between the two worlds, the public and the private, that allows a foundation to invoice a corporate entity. But the problem is that a lot of our clients contract to large companies like Rio Tinto and BHP, like these big mining companies, and the accounting department just don't want to entertain what a foundation is. They don't really understand the 3346 form, even though it's from the Australian Tax Office site. And so our clients have to set up what we call a hybrid model. And they still set up a company that has a number that issues the tax and so forth, but they would send whatever would be deemed as profit, which would ordinarily be taxable, then they would send that across to their foundation to disperse it ethically. Sometimes the system is so convoluted, Rick, that they've set up, that sometimes it's nigh impossible to still trade and sustain your family without running one of these hybrid models. To truly operate in the private, I mean, Steph and I and Truthology do, because we simply we are given donations and remuneration from our clients directly. So we don't require any of these statutory regulations. We don't have workers' compensation or insurances or anything like that. So it's quite easy for us, as it is for a lot of our other clients that run small little businesses like carpenters and florists, and there are some shop owners and so forth. So it's not an easy question to answer. It's really on a case-by-case basis and can be predetermined by who people have been in business relationships with. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense, and I appreciate that answer because, like you said, there is really no silver bullet, and and I appreciate you going over those aspects. Boy, where do you go from there?
I think the whole public and private thing. You guys have probably heard of Dean Clifford. Is that right?
Yes, we have.
Yeah. I mean, I like some of the things that Dean says in terms of understanding that we are sentient flesh and blood beings, and we can operate that way. But we can also operate the other way, and it's about understanding which way is ethical at which time and which hat you're wearing. So it's not impossible to live in the both worlds. In fact, it's I would say right now it's impossible not to live in both of those worlds.
Right.
For instance, as you know, we're traveling around, and I didn't want to get birth certificates for my two boys, and so I issued a different document that was witnessed by my beautiful partner, who I'm pretty sure she was there at the birth. At the birth, we had home births, and I caught my babies, and
so did I, Mark.
There was a midwife, and so there's no denying that these beautiful beings came into the world. But we didn't want to issue, of course, a birth certificate for all the reasons that we know. But then when we applied for a passport, which of course you need to travel and take shuttle across the borders, then that was an issue, and we ended up having a big 3 or 4 hour meeting with somebody very high up in the passport office. We ran through all of this, and you know what was interesting, Rick, was he knew exactly what we were talking about. And he said, I hear you, I comprehend what you're saying, but our hands are tied. We cannot issue a port pass or a passport without a birth certificate. So we reluctantly applied for that. Interestingly enough, because there was a time restriction, he sent me or us a statutory declaration asking a few things, and you know what? He sent it as an open Word document. And so we got in and we actually added a whole heap of clauses that we don't consent to our child being held as security or any sort of security for any undisclosed bonds and so on and so forth. We added all these clauses, and then we signed it at the bottom. And I think he just, when he received it on his fax, just looked at statutory declaration, looked for our signature at the bottom, and away it went. And so we have a birth certificate, but there was a whole heap of documents that we issued with it. I'll give you one little tip for your listeners as well. If you're ever signing something in the public and you're doing it reluctantly, or you're doing it as a means to an end, I always sign it with V.C in front of my name. Have you guys been aware of that?
V.C. No, the only thing I had heard was to put under duress after your name.
They'll pick that up and they won't accept it. If you put V.C, it's Latin for V coactus. Now, V coactus means under duress. Now, of course, through their rituals and procedures, they always slot some Latin in there somewhere. So V coactus means under duress, and quite often it'll just look like your signature. They won't pick it up. So anytime I'm signing a bank document or anything in the public where I really need to do it to get on with my life, I do it under duress, and I notice them the same.
That's beautiful. V.C. All right, I will start to implicate that as we speak, because I too, Mark, am doing my darndest to live as sovereign a life as I possibly can, realizing that the document that I live under, that chartered this particular country, was the Declaration of Independence, which made every man equal, displacing the idea of the divinity of kings or the right of kings, and so if in fact we are all equal, then we are all sovereign, and we can all operate as kings, if you will, over our own personal property and kingdom.
Right.
So as I work with different fiduciaries across my life, including superintendent of schools and all those kind of things, because at this time I'm not completely able to home educate my 6 children. I have 6, and 4 of them I too home birthed myself. I caught them without a midwife, so I feel like I got a brother across the seas here. So this is a good thing. And one of my children actually do not have a birth certificate, never have, and we've run into very, very interesting situations along the way because of that. But we're learning, and here's the great thing is when you have a child that doesn't have a birth certificate, you learn quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I will just say, and congratulations on all that, Rick, too, because it takes a lot of courage to do some of those things, but it's very rewarding. But I will just say, one of the things you said is that how can we live in the private? The world's in a pretty messed up place, and having done a fair bit of travel lately, I can see that it's still very messed up, and some of the economies through Europe are on their knees. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not a doomsayer by any stretch, because I believe that humanity will hopefully rise above this. But one of the decisions that Steph and I made many years ago was to try and establish an intentional community. And in fact, if people go to my website, one of the modules on there, we run through this. And we don't have a lot of money. We do give away, virtually everything above what we need. We do give away. But I've said to Steph, I said, I think one day somebody's going to watch our modules and come to our site, and they're going to offer some land. And funny enough, about 3 or 4 months ago, that's exactly what happened. We had a beautiful chap watch our modules and really connected with Steph. My partner Steph is just a beautiful lady. And he went through and watched the modules where I actually talk about setting up land. We like an area in Australia called Bellingen. And he said he just about dropped his cup of tea on the ground because he's got 700 acres near Bellingen. And so he wrote to us and said, I'd like to donate this to Truthology to set up an intentional community. So that's what we're finally doing. That's why we're going back to Australia. The intention is to set it up with, say, 20 or 30 other like-minded families, and to homeschool our children, grow our own produce, and live a very private life. And I think that that's what it's going to take, is a lot of these communities, and there are a lot of these communities already established. We're not paving the way here by any stretch. But I think that's what it's going to take, is to demonstrate a different way of being, demonstrate that you can actually live in a moneyless society. And that's what our goal is. And I know that it's going to take 5 or 10 or 15 years, or maybe even our children, to carry it on. But I know that it's absolutely possible because you know what, Rick, we've done it before. Money hasn't been around for that long. And the animals get by quite fine without money. So I'm sure that if that's our true intention and we have a great group of people, that it's possible to get at least a lot closer towards that. So that to us is walking the walk. And we know it's not going to be what they say, a bed of roses. I know that there's going to be disagreements, and there's going to be ego, and there's going to be a whole heap of issues that we need to work forth. But that's what we're here for, Rick. We're not here to live in our little homes and have a scared little wave at the neighbour on a Thursday morning when we put the bin out. We're here to interact, and we're here to work through our stuff. And so that's our goal.
That's absolutely beautiful. Well said. And that's exactly what our goal here is as well, as we have some expectation of funding that is coming our way, and that's exactly what we are intending to do as well. We didn't call it an intentional community, but that's a great name for it. Living here in South Dakota in the Midwest, where the entire state of South Dakota has less people in it than one major metropolis area. 750,000 people live in the state. We have wide open spaces, and that's, I've been interviewing some great gentlemen. One guy that I will reference to you, quite interesting. OneCommunityGlobal.org. His name is Jay Sable. And he actually has open source blueprints on building a self-sustainable community, and it's quite interesting. Good stuff. I would pass that on to you to check out as well. But with 3 minutes left in the broadcast, I'd just like to, first of all, thank you again for coming on, because you've been a marvelous guest, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to kind of plug where you're going from here.
Look, I'm really happy to have the opportunity to come on, mate. And these are the types of things that I want to do more often, because I've been so busy in the doing and writing documents and setting things up that I now really want to sort of spread my wings and start doing a few more things like this, because I just want to draw people to our site and have a look. It's free. Come along to, as you've mentioned, it's all the W's, truthology.org.au. You jump on and sign up as a member. There's 10 modules on there, which is a talk that I did probably about 4 years ago now. So I've got long hair and some very bad jokes, but the information is still quite relevant. And there's, as you said, there's thousands and thousands of hours of other research and links and documentaries and articles on there. And really, people's sovereignty is going to come from within. It's not going to come from my site or Dean Clifford's site or Max Egan's site or anybody's site. It's going to come from within. But at least there's some good pointers there. And I'm happy to have Skype calls with anybody who wants to chat or has specific questions down the track. My Skype address is Coming Back to Harmony, all one word. So it's Coming Back and then the number 2 Harmony. That's my Skype address.
Yes, and Mark, you're blessed. I'm really thankful again to have you on this particular program, and yes, I will also confirm that your partner is a beautiful woman. I see her picture on your Skype here. You guys have look like you have a wonderful little thing going there. And, God bless you guys. I hope that everything continues to, what's the word I'm looking for here? Evolve the way that it will. So that said, thanks again for coming, and we appreciate it very much.
My pleasure, Rick. Happy to chat anytime, mate.
All right. So for Mark Darwin, this is Rick Hidalgo. This has been another episode of the House of Hidalgo show on the Estate Radio Network. We appreciate you all coming by. Make sure you pass this archive on to everyone you know. God bless all, and be safe. Thanks, Mark.